I was never good at letting things go. That's why, when my grandchildren insisted I declutter the house, I did what I could. Set aside a few old clothes, dusted off picture frames no one looked at anymore, and left the books for last. Always, the books for last. That cold April morning, the mailman left a box at my door. No familiar sender, just a label. Archive of the former Lyon Public Library, Section C. My fingers trembled. 62 years since I'd last seen those shelves. 62 years avoiding opening exactly what now sat in front of me. I carried the box into the living room and, for some reason, sat on the floor, as if I were 18 again, living through the war. The first book was blue, its cover faded, pages yellowed by time. A copy that, if memory served, used to sit on the third shelf of the central aisle, where he would spend Tuesday afternoons. I opened it carefully, and there, between pages 174 and 175, was a piece of paper, precisely folded. My breath caught. His handwriting, unmistakable, so firm, so neat, as if he had written it yesterday. If you're reading this, something went wrong. I was here. I waited for you. But now, I have to go. Maybe one day we'll meet again. Maybe this war won't take everything. Eric. For a moment, everything vanished. The clock, the couch, the box, all dissolved around me. I was back in 1943, in the silence of Tuesday afternoons, in that guarded library, with the sad-eyed soldier who read Camus and hid notes between chapters of Dostoevsky. I loved him. And I never said it out loud. Maybe, after all this time, it's finally time to tell the story. Not for him, but for myself. Lyon, 1943, German occupation. Back then, I believed silence meant safety. Working at the public library during the war was, in a way, a privilege. There was warmth, there were books, and there was routine. Predictability felt like hope. Each morning, I crossed the main bridge in Lyon with my worn coat and lowered gaze. I avoided soldiers, lingering looks, and newspapers with red headlines. My world was made of pages, shelves, and breaths held between one reading and the next. That's where I saw Eric for the first time. I remember the sound of his footsteps, steady, but not rushed. It was rare to see German soldiers there. They preferred cafes, courtyards, interrogations, but not him. He walked in holding a book, spoke French with an elegant accent, didn't smile, just looked at me 1 second longer than he should have. His eyes were pale. Not cold, sad. The kind of sadness you don't learn. You carry. He asked permission to study philosophy, said he needed to remember who he was. That day, I said nothing more than necessary. But when he left, I noticed the book he had placed on the table, The Stranger by Camus. He returned the following days, always at the same time, sat at the same table, read with quiet focus, left without making a sound. I was the one who started it. I wrote a quote from Camus on a scrap of paper and slipped it into the next book he borrowed. In the midst of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer. The next day, the paper was gone. But inside another book, I found his reply. That's the summer I'm trying to find. That's how it all began. No names, no voices, just words hidden between pages in a war no one knew how to end. There was something special about Tuesdays. Maybe it was the sound of the door opening at the exact same time, or the way he folded his coat neatly over the chair, or the quiet comfort that settled between us, even without a single word. Eric never told me his name. I discovered it when he signed one of the notes. Nothing more than that. Eric. No last name, no rank, no history. Back then, names could be dangerous. Our ritual was simple. He left a note inside a book, I replied the next day, in another. Sometimes we used quotes, sometimes our own phrases, wrapped in metaphors that protected us from everything and everyone. I feared someone might find out. But at the same time, it was the only part of my week that made my heart race for something other than fear. Eric never touched me, never came too close. But once, when I handed him a copy of Crime and Punishment, our fingers brushed for a second. And in that moment, I knew. He felt the same. One day, I slipped a small drawing inside a book, a bridge, the one I crossed every morning, and I wrote, "Have you ever thought about crossing it without your uniform?" The next afternoon, he left a single word inside a volume of Sartre. Yes. It was the first time I felt afraid of what we were building. Because I understood then, he wasn't just a deserter in spirit. He wanted to be one in action, and that kind of decision cost lives. It was a Thursday, and like every Thursday, I was alone at the library. Snow fell lightly outside, and the silence of the shelves was almost comforting, until it wasn't. The knock on the door wasn't subtle. It was sharp, authoritative. 2 men in dark coats and sharp eyes entered without waiting for an invitation. The Gestapo. The air grew heavy. They began asking questions that didn't sound like questions. They wanted visitor logs, book loans, schedules, names. But what they were really looking for was fear. When they saw the register, their finger paused on a name. This soldier. Does he come here often? I swallowed hard. Said yes, that he was quiet, read a lot, never caused trouble. What does he usually read? Philosophy, I answered. Interesting. They inspected shelves, tables, drawers. They didn't find anything. But when they left, they took 2 books with them, and a notebook. That night, I didn't sleep. I spent hours trying to remember which books might have contained our messages. The notebook, I was sure, was harmless, just a loan log. But the books, that's when I realized. One of them was the volume where I was supposed to leave Eric's reply that week. The note was still inside. What if they saw it? What if they linked it to me, or to him? I returned to the library the next day with a knot in my throat. But the entrance was closed. A sign taped to the door announced that the building was temporarily closed for security inspection. I sat on the cold step, unable to walk away. I waited for hours. Eric never came. Not that day. Not the next week. Not ever again. That was the day I learned that love doesn't always end. Sometimes it just disappears. Present, 2025. I spent hours staring at that note. My fingers traced the handwriting as if they could reach through time. Reading those words now, after so many years, was like unlocking a door I had sealed shut long ago, afraid that, once opened, the pain would be too much. But there was more than pain in that note. There was presence. There was him. The message wasn't long, but each word weighed as if it had been written with his whole soul. If you're reading this, something went wrong. I was here. I waited for you. But now, I have to go. Maybe one day we'll meet again. Maybe this war won't take everything. Eric. The date in the corner was 2 weeks after the last time I saw him. And then, like a map reacting to light, the pieces began to fit. That blue book. It had been one of the volumes on the back shelf, and likely one of the books taken by the Gestapo during the raid. They must not have noticed the note. Or maybe they did, and thought it meaningless. Years later, when the library was dismantled, part of its collection was stored in the homes of former employees. And now, by some twist of fate, or justice through time, that book had come back to me. I sat in the living room armchair. The afternoon sun streamed through the curtains, and everything seemed suspended, as if the world was holding its breath with me. Eric had come back, not in flesh, not in voice, but in that letter, that one last chance to tell me something he hadn't been able to say before. And I, who had spent a lifetime not knowing if he had forgotten me, now knew. He had waited. He had waited for me. I always thought I had closed that window, the one through which, years ago, entered the cold of war and the longing for something I never dared name. But now I see. It had always remained slightly open. I spent my whole life never speaking of Eric, perhaps out of fear of seeming foolish, or shame for having loved a man who wore the enemy's uniform, or maybe because I was afraid to find out that he truly had forgotten me. But he hadn't. The note was there, and with it, everything I had worked so hard to bury in silence. I remember a specific afternoon, not long after the war ended. I was at the train station, helping a cousin board a train to the south, and for a second, I saw a man on the opposite platform. He had the same height, the same quiet way of walking, and something in his eyes made my heart stop. But as I got closer, it wasn't him. I went home and cried as I never had before, not only for Eric, but for myself. Because that day I understood he hadn't just walked away from the library. He had disappeared from my story, without an ending, without an explanation, without a chance to begin again, or so I thought. Now, with the note in my hands, what had once been a fragmented memory became truth. He waited for me, maybe not for days, maybe not for months, but long enough to believe I would return, and I didn't. Not by choice, but out of fear. Today, at 92, I carry no regrets, but I do carry the gentle weight of one question I'll never be able to answer. What if I had gone back? I spent the days that followed rereading the note like someone rereads a book with an unfinished ending. There were no more pages, but there was a constant presence. Eric had never truly left. It just took me 62 years to hear what he had tried to say. I started dreaming about the library. In the dreams, everything was as it used to be. The smell of old pages, the creak of the wooden chair, the muffled sound of footsteps on stone floors. And he was there, sitting at the same table as always, his coat folded neatly beside him, eyes lowered as if reading slowly, waiting for something, or someone. I woke up with tears in my eyes, but not sadness. It was a calm kind of longing, the kind that no longer burns, only presses gently on your chest. I thought about writing him a letter, one of those that will never be sent. Maybe I still will. Maybe that's how I'll return the note. Not for him, wherever he may be, but for me, for the girl who, at 18, dared to love despite everything, who exchanged notes between the shelves of a war, and who now can finally close that window. Not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Because in the end, the love that never had time was also the love that taught me what truly lasts. Today, the note rests between the pages of a new book. I didn't hide it, but I don't display it either. It's there, like the memory of what was, and of what in a way still is. I don't know what happened to Eric after that. Whether he survived, whether he was taken, whether he waited for me until his last breath. But I know that wherever he went, he carried something that tied him to me. And I carried the same. We never spoke about it. We never said goodbye. But not all. Love needs to be lived to be real. Sometimes it only needs to be felt. And even though time wasn't on our side, the memory remained. Like the last letter. Silent. Unyielding. Unforgettable. If this story moved you, don't leave in silence. Like the video if you believe some loves never truly end. Comment below. Have you ever held on to a story that never had closure? Share it with someone who needs to hear this today. And subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories about love, memory, and the power of the unsaid. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.